So welcome to this month's CC Group Analyst Relations webinar. I'm Duncan Chappell. This is Matt Denby. We're going to introduce ourselves a little bit later on and say more about what we're doing and how we do things. I've got a few points of housekeeping for you. So it's a webinar, not a meeting. So attendees are muted. Speakers, luckily or not, we've checked that. We're going to be recording it because most of the people who register for webinars don't turn up to them. So we're recording the webinar, but obviously being here gives you the opportunity to ask questions. Just to make things easier for us, we suggest that you send questions in via the chat function. I know that some folk are in organizations where the Q&A function doesn't work and the chat function does. So if you have questions, use the chat. We will keep an eye on questions as they come in. Matt, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Matt Denby, and I'm a self-appointed measurement specialist at CC Group. I've been at CC Group a few years now. I joined straight out of university, and CEO of CC Group, Richard Fogg, actually hired me and asked me to help improve measurement at CC Group. So the past few years I've kind of been incorporating different parts of theory and practical elements into kind of developing a measurement program at CC Group. So hopefully, so we'll go through a bit of those bits on the webinar today, and hopefully it'll make sense, and I'll try and answer any questions you guys have today.
Excellent, thank you, Matt. I'm Duncan Chappell. I run the analyst relations team here at CC Group. So there are 4 of us in the analyst relations team, but then we are helped by a large number of colleagues in various ways, including Matt's expertise on the measurement side. So we really benefit from that, and from being part of a larger organization that's working with some incredibly exciting B2B brands around the world. I'll talk a little bit more about us and about our offer in the measurement space later on. And just to give you a little bit more context, we're here to help you. We're an organization that's really driven by insights, and so a lot of what we're doing is about understanding what is happening for analyst relations professionals and sharing our insights with you so that we develop our own thinking and we can help our own clients and help you to inform your stakeholders so that they understand better what you need to be successful in your role. We've got a few webinars scheduled already. So in June, Pedro and I are talking about how analyst relations can accelerate sales. In July, Chloe and Duncan from our deep tech team are coming in to talk about emerging technologies and how analysts are helping that. Daniel, who runs our fintech stream, our AR colleague Nadia and I are going to be talking about fintech buyers in September. And then after then, we would love your feedback about what we might be able to do productively for you in future webinars. Matt and I have never done a poll in a Zoom webinar. I'm gonna launch one of these. I'm gonna launch a poll now, and I hope that you can see this, and it would be wonderful if you could please take this poll. I think you should be able to see it. I think you should be able to interact with it. It will have popped up somewhere. If you have opinions about particular vertical markets that you would like us to follow, if you've got markets where you think analyst interest is especially intriguing, that you would like us to drill down into more depth, then let us know. I think you probably will have picked up that CC Group sponsors the Analyst Firm Awards. So these are awards that are produced in various categories that are given by the Analyst Observatory at the University of Edinburgh Business School to analyst firms in various areas. We're at the moment sponsoring, I think, 7 or 8 of these Analyst Firm Awards in various sectors: telecommunications, Internet of Things, financial technology. Actually, they're collecting data that can be broken down to about 60, 70 different levels. So if there are particular areas that you want us to study, then let us know. Click on these buttons, and that would be super useful. Really interesting.
enterprise tech is currently winning in our polling, followed by, I think, fintech. Oh, and yeah, and that cybersecurity is now taking the second place. So that's quite interesting. I'm just going to read this as a
Yeah.
as a
Oh,
voice
wow. People are
race.
still voting. Yeah. So cybersecurity, I know we have this planned. And in fact, we just did a webinar with our colleague Florrie, who leads our cybersecurity team. There'll be a recording of that. If it's not on our YouTube channel already, then it will be soon. But there we previewed the Analyst Firm Awards for cybersecurity, which I think is coming out on the 8th or the 9th. So if you drop us an email, let us know. We can send you the link to that video. If you subscribe to the CC Group AR newsletter, then you'll also get a report comparing the different analyst firms in those awards. Okay, well, really useful poll. Thank you so much for your help with that. I'm going to close the poll, and then we're going to get on to the meat of things. Thank you. That was a successful experience in the whole polling thing. Great. Okay, thank you. So if you know that book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, then you know that it's important to start with the end in mind. And that's very much CC Group's approach. So what I want to do is just say something about our kind of global approach towards measurement, and then to drill down a little bit more into what that means for us about analyst relations. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we are going to talk about in today's webinar, but then I'm also going to talk about what we're not focusing on today and what we'll be addressing in other webinars. So a major part of what CC Group has been trying to do is to really formalize the CC Group way, to understand the way that we do things and to understand what is different about it, if anything. And I think what's really different about the CC Group way is the way that we start from the audience. So people may know that we're organized into streams. Yeah, so we've got a group of people who are only looking at financial technology, and we're helping to understand the audience that financial technology buyers use. We've got another group of people who are focused on telecommunications, for example. We're only interested in shifting the people who are influencing buyers in telecoms operators. We've got a group of people working on cybersecurity, for example, and again, like this. Well, a large part of what we're doing is really geared around understanding the particular client's objectives. And that's really the start of our process of understanding our task, that we're starting with the audience, we're understanding what strategy is going to move that audience over, we do it, we evaluate what we're doing, and then of course there's various ways that we can leverage outputs to feed into sales and marketing more broadly. That's really what we are engaged in doing as an organization. We're dedicated to doing that for B2B tech providers. And in today's discussion, we're talking about these 3 blocks in the middle. We're talking about the operational part of things, yeah? So the measuring how well we're aligning to our audience, measuring how well we are shifting performance, and then measuring how well we're measuring outcomes and outputs, making sure that we understand that. And this emphasis on starting with the audience and this way that we're organized in these kind of market-focused streams fits into these catalyst studies. So each of our sector streams commissions independent market research companies. They interview buyers. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, we presented the results from an interview with, I think, 200 buyers of high-end cybersecurity solutions. Before then, the previous webinar, we were looking at buyers in telcos. We had like 100 people in telcos. If you think of how few telcos are, that's quite a lot of people. But we're commissioning these reports to understand which audiences are influencing buyers in our target markets. You can get these at the insights link below. Obviously, there's even lots of data in this research, which only our clients benefits from. But what these studies show is that the map of influence in the various markets that we concern ourselves with. And there's a common thread across these insight reports that we see in every business-to-business technology sector. The numbers are slightly different. Analyst influence is deeper in some areas, less deep in others. But pretty much in all of these sectors, what we see is that analysts they're in the top 5 for creating awareness. They're in the top 5 for narrowing down long lists into short lists. And then analyst reports are even more influential in terms of influencing the final purchase, building awareness about vendors, selection of vendors, not just strategies. The influence is so overpowering that analysts are important that we think it has to be key, not just to AR, not just to communications operations, but also key to evaluation. So honestly, this is different from the diagram that I showed you earlier on. So if you think of this kind of generic process of how we understand things, this is how we apply it in the analyst relations space. We're making sure that there is measurement for each of these key 5 activities, and that we are drilling into these as deeply as possible. Prioritization involves a lot of measurement, but prioritization doesn't measure how well you are operationalizing it. Yeah, prioritization is strategy. We have done a separate webinar around that. You can write down this link or click on the link if you're patient enough to wait for the slides to be sent to you, and then you can see how we discuss prioritization. At the other end, leveraging, so sales enablement, marketing enablement. Pedro and I are talking about that in our AR sales webinar. You can register for that webinar and find out what we're saying. So the emphasis here again is on implementation. It's on engagement, it's on perceptions, and it's on outcomes. Yeah. So it's how do we understand how we need to engage with the audience? As we engage with this audience, how are we tracking perceptions? How are we understanding whether perceptions are shifting? What insights can we get from the perceptions that we find in the market? And then finally, with the outcomes, yeah, with the outputs, the outtakes, the content, with our own learnings, what can we do to build up an evaluation of what is happening? That is our process. And again, in this webinar, we're focused on these 3 central activities. In the middle, the implementation tasks. I'm going to pause here because I think I saw a question come into the Q&A. What are the other channels of influence if analysts are number 2? Well, just download the report, yeah, to get to that. You know, other channels of influence are peers, obviously, the media, social media, loads of other influencers, long lists, many lists, reviews. So there are many forms of influence. There's a lovely diagram. If you're a Gartner customer, there's a lovely diagram that Hank Barnes has, which is like a pie chart showing all the information that a buyer would use when they are gathering together insight for a purchasing decision. About half of that information comes from the inside. About half of that information comes from the outside of the organization. I think it's like 16%, 17% of that information is analysts. So analysts are really important. There is this perception of people. I'm a member of the Institute of Industry Analyst Relations, and the Institute, we have a video saying analysts are the alpha and the omega, you know, the be all and end all of influence. And they are certainly the premium, the premier influence, but they are not the only one. And so it's really important to fit that in together. I will let Matt speak eventually. When we talk about AR operations, we're talking about a process, yeah? One of the things that measurement allows you to do is to do things differently, yeah? To recommend how you should be doing something differently. Before you can recommend, you need to evaluate. But before you can evaluate, you need measurements. And before you can measure things, you need to be monitoring. So there's a flow of activities that you need to flow through. Matt, I don't know if you'd like to speak to this slide.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I think so. We spoke about this a bit earlier, but it's basically a measurement. When we look at kind of our measurement activity, there's no kind of one size fits all for our clients. So there's a key number of KPIs that we do have when we onboard new clients. We look at things like goals and objectives. But when we start to measure what our, at least on the PR side, what our PR activity consists of, is very bespoke to each client. We try to tailor what they'll find is most useful out of the campaign, what they want to report to the C-suite on their end, to report the entire activity, and we'll work with them to kind of find the best ways. So what we usually do is we kind of agree with them on kind of key measures prior to any kind of measurement activity. During the kind of start of the onboarding process of the program, we'll usually show a bunch of benchmarks and KPIs at the start when we've taken them on, and we're even during the pitching process to kind of show where they sit in the market. This is kind of where we start to look at things like share of voice, where we kind of see where clients and businesses sit in the overall media landscape, and we measure that. Otherwise, we tend to kind of look at building those out into much bigger reports. So we can look at things like key message analysis, share of voice, again, look at things like key volume over time, different kind of spokesperson coverage, and that can all take time, which is why it all kind of varies on each client. It also varies on, you know, what competitors you're looking at in the overall landscape. And it's all very tailored, which is why kind of each budget varies differently. Though we kind of tend to try and keep it under 10% of the overall retainer, just because if you're spending the entire time measuring your overall activity, you're just measuring nothing, and that's not particularly good. I can see a question that's come in. So this is, which AR platform do you recommend for tracking and measurement? Architect or OZ? When do you really need one of those? Duncan, given that you're the AR specialist, are you able to answer this?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they're both really good, and they both don't do everything that you need. I think, I think you should definitely use one of these platforms, but I don't think you should choose either of these platforms because of their ability to support measurement. Yeah, I think that's. I don't think that would be the right approach. But I do have screenshots from both of them later on in the presentation. They're both really good solutions. But I think they support rather different kinds of workflow. So actually, what you need to do is think about your own work processes and then see which of these solutions best supports your own work processes.
Hmm. I mean, I certainly can't speak to kind of AR, but on the public relations side of thing, we use something called TrendKite, and that's literally kind of just a way of automating how to pull in all our clients' coverage and all our competitors' coverage to kind of save us the time of having to kind of sift through hundreds of pieces of coverage. I know some clients ask for us to look at competitors that are on a kind of global scale, so that would otherwise be sifting through thousands of pieces of coverage in the overall landscape. So that's what we use. Sorry, you missed the name. That's TrendKite. They recently got bought by Cision, so I think they're called something like Cision Analytics. Yeah. But you can, if you search TrendKite, that'll come up almost immediately. It's quite well used in the public relations area. Cool.
Thank you.
So, add, Duncan. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, just to say that, as you say, different clients have got different requirements. So the investment differs. I've seen some clients that are spending 21% of their budget on measurement. Other people spending 1%, and you get what you pay for. It depends on what you need for your programs. There are some people that are in different markets where they need more measurement, more insights, and others that don't. Your mention of share of voice reminds me to say something later on when we come to talk about share of voice.
No worries.
So, thinking about these three areas of implementation that I spoke about: engagement, perception, and outcomes. Everyone has to have a lame acronym, and there's no lamer than YAPTIR. If you have any Turkish friends, hi, it's a word in Turkish. And what we're looking at here is firstly seeing ways of tracking engagement. So by engagement, just are we reaching out to the people who we want to? Yeah. Then there's tracking perceptions. What is going on in the market? What is being said? What is not being said? And then there's outcomes. What are the changes that we are seeing in the market as a result? Well, hopefully as a result of our program, maybe as a result of other people's activities as well. We organize them into these 6 silos. Silos is a terrible word, into these 6 areas of excellence. And of course, what we find is that clients with different levels of investment, they want to measure different things. Yeah. If you're spending 1% of your budget, you're just really measuring your own activity. Yeah. You're measuring 5%, 6%. Okay, it's probably going to be worth you tracking share of voice. You're getting up to 10%. You're definitely going to be tracking perception. Yeah. You're more up at 20%, you're going to be generating insights. You're going to be tracking, you'll probably be tracking what's going on with social media, for example, and with web traffic. I'm going to step through these activities individually. There's just like a lot of words and a lot of charts here, but it's a measurement webinar, right? But there's no way to avoid that. I know you're going to forgive me for this. So somebody mentioned architect earlier on. Here's a chart I made earlier. So one really important thing to know is just, are you doing the interactions that you intend to do? And are you spending them? Are you spending your time with the people you want to spend with? So for example, here's a chart to show, with this client, they're spending 23% of their time with Gartner and 15% with Forrester and 11% with IDC. And well, those numbers feel right to me. I'm pretty comfortable about that. I hope the client is comfortable as well. But this very, very summary level data is actually really useful because I've certainly seen some clients where we start working with them, we look at where they've done their interactions, and their interactions do not look normal like this. They look super weird because they've been spending a lot of time with people who've been phoning them up and bullying them, and or they're spending time with their spokespeople's favorite analysts rather than the ones that are impacting on the client. So actually something as simple as tracking your contacts, tracking your interactions, that can be really important. Something that is obviously really important to everybody is tiering analysts, and to make sure that the targets that you have, for example, we would aim to brief all of our top tier targets at least twice during a year. All of our tier 1 targets, ideally once. Tier 3, frankly, as infrequently as possible, but whenever the client really wanted. We want to make sure that the picture looks like the picture that the client has gotten us to, is hiring us to do. Yeah. Obviously, we are not collecting this data only at the level of the firm. Yeah, we don't tier firms. Yeah, we tier individual analysts on the basis of prioritization. If you were in the last webinar about prioritization, you would know that what we're doing is we're targeting individuals who we know are impactful on the sales process.
Yeah. Just a note on that kind of tiering. It's so important to kind of tier that. I mean, even on the media side, we spend a lot of time tiering each of our publications, not necessarily in relation to how many readers they have, but in terms of their relevance to the client, in terms of the actual influence of the individual journalists, in terms of their domain authority, how much web traffic they have the potential to drive. So it's really important to kind of know that, and rather than report simply quantitative metrics, you can kind of really turn that into much more qualitative data in the whole reporting process by knowing which ones to target. And from the perspective of the agency side, it does well to hold yourself accountable for the work you do, and to give the to kind of do the best work possible, rather than spend time on getting coverage, or I suppose getting interactions that just won't have the same impact.
Yeah, there's a lot more to be said about tiering, and most of that is in the previous webinar that we had about prioritization. So do check that out if it's an interest. The next easiest thing, I think, what we've spoken about, well, you mentioned it earlier on, is share of voice. We've got a number of technologies and resources available to us for that. I mean, Matt, can I just say, when clients talk, what do clients think share of voice is? And when we feed it back to them, what are we showing them?
We show them a really pretty chart that has their name and their competitor's name in. But no, most clients that I've definitely, we've talked about share of voice, they do have an understanding of what it is. For those who don't know kind of what share of voice is, it's literally a volume of measuring the volume of coverage that your business has in comparison to your competitors, and that's kind of your share of voice in the media landscape. When we measure share of voice, we look at it very specifically in relation to that tier 1 coverage. So kind of going back to that media tiering, we look at it in relation to the most impactful media where you sit in comparison to your clients, which I think is quite important. Yeah, I mean, that's more or less what it is. In terms of the things that share of voice can show you, it can do quite a few things. So I mean, one of the things, obviously, you can see where you sit in relation to the media landscape. If you look more if you look more into the data, you can start to segment it into different media sectors. So if you have quite a holistic share of voice analysis of the entire kind of media landscape, you can segment it into things like I don't know, fintech, IT, security, for example, if those are the sectors that client covered, and you can kind of see where they sit in those individual areas and measure where maybe they want to improve, maybe they want to eat a bigger chunk of a certain market, and we can look to say, okay, well, we'll build that into our objectives and start to improve it in that certain area. One of the other things that share of voice can do for us is it can look at the different key topics that are being spoken about in certain areas. So again, when we dive into the data, we can start to pull that out and think, okay, how many times are they being mentioned in relation to security? And we can look at that kind of security share of voice in relation to the other clients and think, oh, do they have a dominance on security? Do we need to think about improving that? Or maybe they want to look more at 5G. Do we want to start putting in objectives around improving that? So those are the kind of other things that you can do with share of voice. One of the other things that we're doing around share of voice at the moment is looking at spokesperson share of voice. I know that some of our clients have requested us to look more into that, to think that, okay, these are the spokespeople that we're using. What are our competitors' spokespeople? Maybe we should be using more of our CEOs. Should we be using more researchers? And that can kind of help guide the whole planning process.
Mm-hmm. As you say, it's really important to gear this around the needs of the client. So yeah, there can be, like this kind of big circular diagram over here. This is definitely the kind of rather simple diagramming that most of my customers look for. I know that this screenshot we've got down here shows some of the incredible functionality that's in the tool that we're using. I don't think we have any clients with 142,000 items or something, but it shows that there's something there. I think definitely there are some clients where one mention is the same as one mention from a share of voice point of view. There are others who are really interested in segmenting, passing mentions from mentions in headlines and so on. All of that somebody takes more resource. So I think a lot of that reflects the internal measurement that the client has. I think the other thing that the share of voice analysis can do is it's really powerful in a comparative setting, that it allows you to see, for example, in this firm versus that firm, are you being mentioned more? Are you being mentioned less than the competition? This is something that's really easy to do with analysts, because you've got most of your coverage is coming from a really small number of analysts, even though the indexes that we have access to track hundreds of analyst firms. Obviously, just a few handfuls of analyst firms are producing most of the content that's published on any one day. And it also gives us some insight into whether pictures are converting well. Certainly what we see is that when we invite analysts to meet with our different clients, the conversion rate on those pitches is a little bit different. And obviously the conversion rate for your pitches is going to be echoed in the share of voice. If you're spending a lot of time with analysts, they're going to mention you more often. If you can't convince them to meet you, they're probably not interested in you enough to write about you very often. So that's another really useful operational metric, which is super easy to count if you're using Architect, because in Architect you can see how many interactions you've done, and you can really easily see how many interactions you've done that are not briefings, and you can calculate the ratio between those two.
Yeah. I suppose one of the other things around share of voice that I've been reading about is that there's share of voice that we measure on the PR side, which is in relation to media coverage, and then there's also something that someone called true share of voice, which is social media mentions, which is meant to kind of analyze, measure people very strictly, kind of on their Twitter activity and Facebook activity, which can be quite good, especially if your client is spoken with your business, or your client is spoken about a lot in the media landscape. Definitely on the consumer side, this is very useful because you get a lot of people talking about you, but a lot of the time otherwise in the B2B landscape, it's often just sharing articles, which is still good, but I think we find, at least I certainly find, it much more useful to see share a voice on a media perspective. But that might differ from analysts, from an analyst perspective, Duncan, because you're looking at individual people, aren't you?
Well, I must say what I found very useful, Matt, earlier on, you were talking about these kickoff studies that we do with clients, that APA, as we call it, back at the house. And what I think is very useful there is to compare the share of voice in the media with the share of voice that you have with analysts. Because if you're doing better with the analysts, typically it shows you that you've got some thought leadership potential that you're not really using well in the media.
Yeah.
But if you're performing well in the media, it shows that you're almost certainly not powering up your analyst relations to the same level that you are resourcing your media relations. So being able to compare those things, kind of regardless of the numbers, actually comparing those, it gives organizations an idea of whether they're punching above or below their weight, and it also gives them a place to aim at. Yeah. Maybe Megaport is at 6% with the analysts, but it's at 8% in the media. Well, it seems like 8% might be a really good target for Megaport to have, for example. Yeah. Let me move on now to talk about perceptions. There are three main ways that we're using to track perceptions, none of which are incredibly devious, luckily. The one thing that we're using Architect for is for tracking perception in content. So if you're an Architect customer, you compare premium, real premium, and get access to Architect's premium content. This is a fantastic base of data. It's got about 2 million items of analyst content in, so it's really useful for us. And that includes research from about 30 analyst firms. And then if you find other things, you can import those in. But that allows us to be able to track coverage for clients, see how they and their competitors are being mentioned, and then to score each brand name, each topic in a piece of content from being very positive to being very neutral, and to produce management information that can give a rough idea. I must admit, personally, I find averages a little bit more useful in this chart, but this kind of information is very good. A super simple thing that hardly anybody is doing is a net promoter score with analysts. It's very easy. Just after the briefing, you send them an email, click this, press the button. We use a tool where you can embed the question into the email. That's actually a really useful thing to do. Not everybody will do it, but it allows you to compare between spokespeople, to compare between business units, between campaigns, between analyst firms, what these scores look like. A really important thing for us is perception scoring in Architect. We use this grid where we evaluate the briefing to say, was it conversational? It's good if the analyst speaks more. It's not so good if the analyst speaks less. And was the conversation varied? If the conversation is at a higher level, more about the value of the solution, that is good. If it is not, if it's at a lower level, mostly about the offer, that's a worse thing. So depending on where you are in this grid, we give a numerical score to where you are, depending on where you plot on the grid, and then we record that in Architect. So the same way that you have this kind of perception score, we can score each interaction with each analyst in a briefing. Even different analysts in the same briefing can get a different score, and that's a really powerful thing, a really effective way of comparing analytically what performance in the AR program. And we can move a little bit more deeply into perceptions. I'd say like the classic way of doing this are these surveys of analysts. Obviously, we have this partnership with the Analyst Observatory at the University of Edinburgh, so they conduct qualitative interviews with analysts as well as quantitative research that produce little charts like this. But what content analysis allows us to do is to really show message cut through and message pull through. Matt, I think it's fair to say that these are phrases that I did not know before I met you. So I'm gonna pose a question to you. I mean, how can you, in fact, just before you do that, there's a question that came in. What tool are you using to track perception in content? That is available in Architect, yeah? So let me just go back to show this diagram here. So in Architect, you, as well as being able to save interactions in Architect, you can save content in Architect. And then when you edit the item, you can score each individual item of content in. And so there's content in there already. You can import things. If you have the premium content add-in, you could also bulk import from the premium content add-in, which is a huge time saver. It absolutely has to be done manually. That's not a problem for us. We've had enough experience with tools to know that manually scoring perception really helps, even if you're just using that data to seed an AI later on. Matt, obviously one of the things about analysts is that they're producing tweets, they're producing blog posts, they're being interviewed in the media. So this makes them very measurable when it comes to messages. Yeah. So how do we show message cut through, and what is message cut through again?
So it's not as it's kind of not as complex as it sounds. So essentially, when we talk about message cut through and creating objectives around message cut through with our clients, is we kind of agree on a certain set of key messages and key topics that they want to be known for in the media landscape. So I mean, let's say, let's use an example of 5G, for instance. A client wants to be known for 5G, so we'll plug in a lot of keywords around 5G into something like Trendkite or something, and start to analyze how the client or the business is mentioned in relation to 5G. So we'll look at that, and we can measure that in terms of how much they are, and look and compare that against their competitors to think, okay, are you being spoken about more about 5G in comparison to someone else? You've been spoken about less? Are you speaking about it at all? Is it being talked about positively? Is it being talked about negatively? And when we talk about cut through specifically, when we start to mention objectives about cut through, we tend to turn that into quite literally a percentage. So if a client, we can go to a client and say, okay, we'll produce content and have a 60% cut through of key messages around 5G. The 60% might seem a bit low considering we're creating an entire PR program about that, but we need to account for the fact that this client might be quite big and they might have a lot of organic coverage that comes through that's not necessarily about 5G. They might have had a crisis recently. They might have had a huge ransomware attack. So we might need to be wanting to, okay, divert that attention away and talk about something else. So we'll say, okay, we'll produce messages that are around just a different topic, and produce a goal around that specifically. So that's kind of what it means when we talk about cut through. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I think so. So. Thank you.
So sorry, we've had a question come through. How would you measure end user decision maker trust? That's quite an interesting one. I think you probably need something that is a lot more qualitative rather than quantitative. So something more like more like surveys, which is something that's a little easier to do when you talk about things in a consumer market, because you have a much larger sample to go through. The other way to kind of do it is the easier way to do it is through kind of content analysis, to see how you're mentioned and kind of to do a sentiment analysis. But when it is about trust, it is kind of more around those kind of surveys, conducting them, I suppose, in a B2B landscape. The area you could do that is at events. What do you think, Duncan?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the question is asked by somebody who provides an amazing solution that does exactly that. I think that I must admit that from an analyst relations point of view, I think very few analyst relations programs are in direct contact with end users. Yeah, so I think as a rule of thumb, that's not something that analyst relations programs can do. I'd also say that from our perspective as an analyst relations provider, we're working with organizations of a certain size, so we're looking at organizations that are making that are really focused on shifting analyst perception. And if they are measuring end user trust, they will be doing that at a corporate level, not through their analyst relations program. In fact, probably not even through their corporate communications program. It's something that would be more often to be done through customer service, or through sales, through customer advocacy, through market intelligence. It probably wouldn't be done by an analyst relations program. What an analyst relations program can do, however, like this diagram here, is it can ask industry analysts, how do customers feel? Yeah. So if you ask an analyst, do you trust this firm? If you ask an analyst, does this firm's how does this firm's customers speak about them? Yeah. Do the customers you speak to of this company, do they find it trustworthy? I mean, that is a way of being able to get insight that boils down all of the conversations that those analysts are having with customers. So this is one of the advantages of speaking to analysts, that you get a lot of feedback, that when you're speaking to them, you're speaking to everybody who they've also spoken to in a concentrated way. So that is really that's really valuable, and it can be important, because you are speaking all the time to your own customers, and you don't know exactly how trusted or untrusted other providers are. If I bank with HSBC, I don't bank with Barclays. I don't really trust Barclays, but then I'm not a customer of Barclays. What do I know? You'd have to speak to people who were customers of Barclays to find out if people prefer Barclays. So there's that kind of comparison. Let's move on to talk now about outcomes. So if we think that we have engagement as the activity that we're doing, perceptions as what we're seeing, what shape is the sea now that we're out there, then we have outcomes. I've got this lovely diagram that the people of Spotlight have sent me. One of the things that we're doing all the time is collecting insights. So in fact, let me just go back to this little diagram with the grid in the bottom right hand corner there. When we're tracking briefings, we're scoring the briefings to see what the conversation is about. Is it conversational? What is it about? Actually, we write quite a long memorandum after every briefing, and then we aim to integrate these and give feedback to clients, insight reports. So what you get from an analyst relations program ideally will be kind of outcuts, like clippings from what analysts are saying or doing, and then insights where we are either collating what the analysts are saying, or we're kind of looking at what the analysts are saying and then making sense of it. So, for example, one of our colleagues, Joanna, who's an editor in our content team, has been doing some work for a very large telecommunications equipment manufacturer. She's been reviewing 300 or so pieces of content from analysts about this firm, and then writing something up to say, well, actually the conversation used to be more about this, and that was good for you, but now the conversation is a little bit more about that, and that's not so good for you. You want to shift the conversation there. So that kind of analytical, qualitative insight, not just packaging up what the analysts are doing, but actually kind of making sense of it. This is really really useful. If you use the Spotlight Oz tool, they have this super cute little thing where when you're in the briefing, you can use this tool in real time. You're in the briefing, you can open up the Spotlight Oz tool. If somebody is saying something that's relevant to the market, you can type this piece of feedback in so you remember it, and you can put feedback into these five baskets, and it allows you to see by looking at the colors whether the analysts are hot or critical on you. You can pull out separate reports in each of these areas, which will be different for different stakeholders internally. This is really useful because if you can present the insights to your stakeholders in a way that's easy for them to understand them, then that's very valuable. So we are surveying our customers. This NPS score that we do with analysts, we also do an NPS score with our own clients, which is really important for us. So surveying to see what insights people use, that's a very good habit to get in with. Also looking at engagement, so looking at the kind of content that we're providing, analyst content, derivative content, providing content in different ways. By looking at the traction of the insights, you see the kind of insights that people use. It might be different from the ones that they think they're going to use. That's very valuable for us. Matt, obviously you're producing a lot of reports that are used not only by our immediate stakeholders, but I guess very often people are showing these pieces of paper, these PDFs. There's no paper anymore. People are sharing these PDFs with their bosses. Do you see that? Is there a difference between the kinds of insights and reports that your immediate stakeholders are using and the things that they use to report to the outside world?
I was gonna say, who uses a printer anymore? Who's presenting in person right now? In terms of immediate kind of insights that we produce, one of the most requested things that we get from our clients at the moment is literally share of voice analysis. That's a really kind of, people really want to know where they sit in relation to their clients. They really want to know what the competitive landscape looks like in the media, and that's really useful for benchmarking. When we talk about kind of insights, we can kind of talk about when we dig a lot deeper into the data, and a lot of this is kind of done at the pitching stage when we start to look at things like situational analysis, and we can start to see the different kind of white spaces where the different kind of content we can produce is. So a lot of that kind of is digested at the pitch stage, and then later on when we start doing our different reports, sometimes on year-on-year reports, to kind of see what's been said and what can we say in our kind of review, in our review. So those are the kind of insights that we tend to deliver. I think that some of the other ones I've already mentioned briefly when we start to talk about a share of voice analysis. So one of the things that is being requested more and more is how much are our spokespeople being talked about? What are our spokespeople talking about specifically? What are our competitors' spokespeople talking about? And there's that kind of I don't know, a kind of notoriety in the landscape. Is this CEO being talked about more than our CEO? It can turn into a bit of a when you start to show it in that kind of view, it can turn into a bit of a popularity contest, but it is being requested more.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting.
So then one of the other insights has just come to me, Duncan.
Oh,
sorry. Yeah. So one of the other things that we've been integrating more is Google Analytics into our programs. And it used to be a while ago that teams wouldn't want to share Google Analytics data with us, but because we're kind of starting to show it in a much more in a much more holistic kind of non-correlative context, we're starting to get a lot more requests to see, okay, we've had this much PR coverage, how can we see that it's driving traffic to our website, because that's one of the main things that we can kind of see awareness. Now, while a lot of the time we can't, there isn't actually that many clicks you can get on websites, you can start to see things that when you're being mentioned a lot more in high tier media. So there's that talk about kind of being mentioned in tier 1 media. If your link is mentioned there, that will affect your domain authority and your ranking on Google and your SEO scores. You can start to see that, okay, we've had 30 pieces of coverage this month, and we can see quite clearly that our traffic is spiked by, I don't know, 10,000%. I had a meeting with a client last week when we were going through our goals and objectives, and we could see quite literally when we overlaid our graphs that said, okay, well, this is how much coverage we've got, and there is a direct correlation. We can see that as coverage has gone up, so has traffic. So those are the insights that we're getting requested a lot more, and that's kind of after the onboarding stage when we do get access to that data.
Thank you. I think that pulls the bridge very, very nicely, actually, to a lot of the things which are much more oriented onto the revenue side of things. So the sorts of things that we're able to see there, especially when we are kind of amplifying analyst content, if we're developing hooks to analyst content or developing, you know, infographics, if we're tweeting about analyst content and then putting in trackable links into those social media shares, then that allows us to see traffic growth and leads. It allows us, definitely what I've seen really intriguingly is working with clients to see, are the leads that come in, like analyst connected leads, is the conversion rate different? Yeah, if a lead comes in from an analyst, is it more likely to convert? Hopefully it is more likely to convert. A really intriguing thing in win-loss analysis is to be able to see which firms are correlated with which outcomes. Yeah, so imagine imagine this diagram down here in the bottom right hand corner. So imagine, you know, the analysts that are the customers who are using Gartner, the customers that are using Forrester, the customers that are using IDC, the customers that are using Omdia. If the win rate is remarkably different for people who are using Gartner than from people who are using IDC, that could be a bit of a clue to what is going on in terms of winning analyst advocacy. Matt, obviously you've just been speaking about traffic. A lot of this kind of revenue traffic, of course, becomes completely dependent on how well clients are themselves tracking their own sales pipeline. You know, I've got a client that was able to track. We got a great piece of report published for ITE. They were able to track somebody coming in, having read that report, going through the deal flow, going through to a whatever $6.5 million deal. At the end of that one sale made the business case for the whole analyst relations program. So, you know, as you say, it can be very hard to get mechanical correlations, but you can see patterns flowing through the data. Do you see clients that are in stronger or weaker positions when it comes to trying to connect up traffic to revenue?
It's quite difficult when you, especially in a B2B landscape, when you talk about kind of generating revenue directly from a program. When you've got the case of consumer business, and I've been to loads and loads of webinars and stuff about measurement and talking about kind of consumer landscape, and it's very easy from their perspective because they have so much traffic that they can measure in coming directly from PR or advertising activity, where they say, oh, I saw this great article, I don't know why I'm going to use a dog food as an example, and you know, I bought that dog food from that website. For B2B, it's a lot more. It's a lot more tricky because those business deals don't happen as frequently as it does in the consumer landscape. It's much better, I think, to look at things in terms of web traffic generated or MQLs generated, because then it's the job of the marketing team to then convert those MQLs. I don't think you can say it's solely reliant on one activity. It's very much the activity of the marketing and the PR agency working together to then produce those results. results. I think it's quite it's quite difficult to say, you know, oh, that deal was solely the responsibility of the PR AR activity. We definitely put it in front of them, but it was up to the marketing team to then convert that.
I can think of one. I think a lot of clients are moving or are either moving towards account-based marketing or deepening their commitment to account-based marketing. And what you just said there reminds me of a client that is able to see the difference between accounts where they've had analyst-related traffic, you know, in some way, and accounts where they've not been able to show that. And again, that's a very simple metric of being able to show, well, actually, you know, the deal is just that much more likely to close if somebody has, you know, somebody in that organization, let's say, has downloaded an analyst reprint that we know about, or that somebody at that organization has clicked on a link that we've distributed that pointed them to a piece of analyst content. Obviously, one of the really big differences with business to consumer marketing is that buying centers are multiple people in B2B. You know, many people in the organization. And you know what these insight reports that I've mentioned earlier on show is how different the makeup is in the buying center as the deal goes through the sales pipeline, and the analyst firms that are used are also very different as you move through the sales pipeline. But again, you just need any kind of data. I mean, I think one of the things about connecting up to Google Analytics is that may not be the very best data available, but it's the data that you have. So the data that you have to hand, this is always the best data to start with. I just want to move on to a final slide.
We've just had a question come through from Anon, but yes, there is a link to the session after it's over. Yes,
there will be. They all end up on YouTube, yeah, as well. So we will distribute a link, but then I think after a few months they end up on YouTube. So, hey, here's the sales slide. So, so unsurprisingly, everything that we've been presenting is something that we're doing mostly for our media relations clients, but you know, well, you know, for most of our media relations clients, and some of these things we're doing for all of our analyst relations clients, like the perception scoring. We're doing that for everybody. What we've seen is that many of the people that we're speaking to need specific support on metrics, specific support on evaluation, and we are here to be your partner if you need an independent evaluation of your analyst relations program. So if that is quite a modest thing, just to make sure that you're engaging correctly, to make sure that you are that you understand where you're at, that you are implementing the program that you intend to implement, that you're allocating your tiering effectively, we are here to support that. If you need this kind of perception tracking, we really benefit from having these expert vertical market streams. It means that we have analyst relations people, editors, media relations practitioners with deep expertise in the vertical markets that we work in. And that means that we're able to really assess content very effectively and to see message cut through happening in a qualitative way, and then supplement that with the quantitative analysis that Matt has spoken to. And then at the outcomes end, we're really able to look at the difference that your program is making, and to source data or partner with you in your own organization to analyze that data and to help you to strengthen the business case and strengthen the performance of your analyst relations. So obviously there's a lot more that could be said about building that link between these outcomes and leveraging the outcomes for sales and marketing. That's what Pedro and I will be speaking about in next month's webinar. I think this seems like a good time to put up my email address, see if there are any further questions that have come in. If there are no other questions, Matt, do you have any final thoughts? I'm going to put this diagram back up because, I love it. Yeah. Any other thoughts? I suppose thinking of it this way, when you see someone, I mean, obviously, we know like some clients are spending 21% on measurement, some clients are spending 1% on measurement. Yeah. And those are not similar organizations. So there are some trends, aren't there? Definitely people in more disruptive, fast moving markets, maybe people in smaller, high growth firms. Do you see any differences between the way that our clients and stakeholders are making the case for measurement? Is that the difference in getting the resource to invest in budget, or is it simply about the measurement culture that's pre-existing in an organization? Maybe how our clients make the case for a measurement budget doesn't make much of a difference.
I think it's very much dependent on kind of. I think it's very dependent on who are they reporting to specifically. You'll get some people who are very interested and very measurement focused. They want to see a lot of the results. I mean, I think we talk about clients, but I mean it's also people within the organization. I mean, a lot of our clients personally have someone to report to, and they need to be able to justify the spends they have on their PR and AR dollars. So it's very much to kind of based off of who are they reporting to, and it is also, I think it's also based off of the size of the client. If it's a particularly larger client, we'll probably want to have a much bigger measurement program to justify all the work that we're doing. We're going to want to make sure we're reporting the right results, the honest results, and make sure that impacts our PR program so that we can improve it in future. But it is, I mean, as mentioned before, it's very much so dependent on each client. I mean, every time I have conversations with clients, I say, these are our goals and objectives, but what will you find the most useful things that we can report to? And we kind of go through the different kind of KPIs and different things that we can report. And I think we'll kind of make recommendations on what is useful and what isn't useful and what they want to see personally. And that's kind of how, you can have different programs that vary from, 1% of the retainer to 20% of the retainer. And I don't think we'll advocate for things that go too high, because as mentioned before, you don't want your clients spending all their money on measurement, because then that's all you're doing. You're measuring a program that doesn't exist, really.
That's true. I just want to click back to the forthcoming webinars, just to make sure that you have these dates in your diary. So next month, using analyst relations to accelerate sales. July, we've got Chloe and Duncan McKean coming in to talk about emerging technologies. Summer break, we'll be here, we're not going anywhere, are we? Then September, we'll be talking about financial technology. So we'll have I mentioned that we have this Catalyst report looking at financial technology. We'll have a new version of the Catalyst report out, which Daniel and Nadia will be working on, and then we're going to get into our drill downs on the various vertical markets. So if there are no more questions, I'm just going to thank you for all being here. You've all been really patient, and I'm amazed that almost everybody has stayed all the way through to the end as well. That's super cool. If you have any other questions, please drop me an email, tweet us, LinkedIn us. You can even Instagram us or find us on Facebook. We'll be here. Matt, thank you so much for joining me today. I think this was really intriguing and great to be able to learn about the greater impact that people can get by using more extensive technologies than they might already be using in kind of made for AR tools.
Absolutely. No, thank you. No, thank you for having me. I'm always happy to talk about measurement. If anyone wants to add me on LinkedIn just to talk about measurement, I 100% welcome that. Excellent. Fantastic.
Matt, thank you so much. Okay, I'm gonna close the webinar now. Thank you so much for being patient. We even went over the hour. Oh goodness me, how embarrassing is that? Thank you so much, and I will speak to you all soon. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.